And a big thank you, of course, to Ron and to AQR. And I'm delighted to be part of this wonderful series and to be with all of you here. I did want to say that being published in so distinguished a periodical, a journal as AQR, has been one of the highlights of my writing life. And I did want to add also that the story that was published in Alaska Quarterly Review is actually the cornerstone of the collection that's to be published by the University of Kentucky next spring. So almost every story in that collection links back to the AQR story, including the one that was in Bellevue. So thank you all very much. And Ron, a heartfelt thank you to you. The story I'm going to read today is a little different. It was written in response to recent events. And I was thinking of the way history repeats itself, how it loops around, and how everything is the same and how nothing is the same. And I was hoping also that this story connects in some way, even if in counterpoint, with the topics for discussion, things like literary journals and their relevance and their connection to our public discourse on questions of race, gender identity, social justice, and of course, healing. So this story, I call this my recursive history story. And it's called Isfahan is Half the World. And it was written, well, I keep tinkering with it. So it's been written over, I guess, several months. It's about a young woman who comes to America soon after 9/11 and who stays on and makes a life for herself here. It runs just under 11 minutes. So a little heads up there. So Isfahan is half the world. 2 towers, a purple banana, a linen shirt, a travel clock without a face, a woman in an airport line, a plane, all of which together could make up a Dali painting, but not a history. Half dazed, I got off the United Airlines plane in New York in September 2002, still eating that rancid banana, all crumpled in my jeans and linen shirt, a smashed travel clock in my luggage. I am a painting in that moment without history, a set of daubs and wriggles on an airport canvas. Arrival is an art of its own unmaking. 2 towers like gateposts across the world, and beyond, conflicts without borders in a blaze of light. By the time I stepped off that plane, 9/11 was already a single word, a word so full of its own weight it sank into silence as it was spoken, a word that implied that the fate of the world was immediate and distant, like overhanging scaffolding on a broken beam. From afar, the word held mystery and threat. In America, it was a keening. And behind it all, chaos and sorrow, but of a kind cinematic in a blurred and parallel realm. But more immediately, a sharp-eyed customs man. "What's in your bag, ma'am?" And the meekness of my response, "Just papers, money, a passport, cosmetics, a clock, no perfume bottles, no cologne. You can move on." 7/11 had been the magic word. Uncles, family, friends, the gardener's affluent brother-in-law, they were 7/11 men, each with a convenience store in New Jersey or Indiana and an additional bank account in Mumbai, Calcutta, Pune. People who traded candy bars and toiletries over counters to strangers with dollar bills and cars growling in the lot, still in gear. 7/11 was the gateway to America. 9/11 shut the door. Well, that was the story I was told. Be very careful. Sikhs have been killed for wearing turbans. Tekbir Singh, a man in jail for spelling his name out loud at JFK. T for terrorist, E for Ibrahim, K for Kalashnikov. He thought his hijinks made him appealing to airport authorities. He was from Ludhiana in the Punjab. Guantanamo sounded like a gecko or a Mexican song. Not so, he found out the wrong way. His was the cautionary tale. Watch your step, be a good girl, visit Disney World, get a bank account. A husband, maybe, but not necessarily. There are suitable options in India as well. My parents waved me off at the New Delhi airport. I left them lonely, waving back before boarding the United Airlines airplane, armed with the promise of a graduate fellowship at Syracuse. I left with $200, a leather suitcase, and a list of things to do. Here was my list: Baywatch, McDonald's, Macy's, the Mall of America, baseball, and why it wasn't cricket, fuzzy bedroom slippers, pineapple pizza, crime, but not directly, everything in Washington, D.C., the United Nations, Dustin Hoffman, God, the American version in good clothing. I can't say I had much success with the list, except for the pizza and McDonald's, neither of which required much effort, but could be brought to your door or requested over a squawky receptor. Baywatch was in reruns, and the slippers gave me a sense of squashing things underfoot. And meeting God in your Sunday best was disconcerting, rather like an appointment with a criminal defense lawyer who barely believed your protestations, but felt obliged to anyway. Dustin Hoffman had grown old. So it's fair to say my America didn't quite work out as planned, except for graduate school and friends who were inevitable in a crowded dorm. What sort of name is Stalina? Demanded James, my dorm room neighbor. Is that really your name? Is it Sanskrit? He was told all Indian names originate in Hindu mythology, trailing weights of impossible expectations. His Indian names were Sanjay Gupta and Pico Iyer, maybe a Raj or two, a Kumar and a Patel. The Amartya Sens and Sundar Pichais were still down the road. Not very, I admitted, sort of made up. My dad was a poet. News to me, said James, but didn't challenge the information. He was a Sunday best sort of fellow. Live and let live if you weren't the same, all God's children. He offered me half of his bologna sandwich, and a year later, a diamond ring. I think sometimes of that man from Ludhiana. I give him a history and a future. I fill in gaps and add flourishes. His is my other story. So Tekbir Singh comes from a village in the Punjab where the Green Revolution was in bloom until the government subsidies grew scarcer, the competition greater. He decided to take his chances with his brother-in-law in New York who ran a taxi service. The man from Ludhiana applied for the immigration lottery. He was chosen. What happens next is anybody's guess. Perhaps he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after the stint in jail and a host of warnings from the local FBI. He bought 2 taxis. He married a woman from the Bronx, and they had 2 bonny children, a boy and a girl. He bought a house in Queens and flew the Stars and Stripes outside his front door to ward off suspicious neighbors. And so his turban would be seen as a sign of melting pot solidarity, not a threat. His neighbors agreed he was a splendid fellow. His son was partial to the Knicks. His daughter became a popular high school cheerleader. They all lived happily ever after. Or not. Perhaps he stayed in jail. Perhaps the authorities found just cause for terroristic intentions. Perhaps he was deported. Or perhaps, as neither extreme seems likely, he found work as a part-time doorman on the Upper East Side, where beautiful women breezed past him through the shimmering glass doors, through the shining foyer, up the speedy elevator, into a different ether. He smiled and learned the tricks of murmured compliance. Good morning, sir or madam. What a beautiful day it is today. He flattened his growling consonants to please the American ear. He was the right sort of immigrant, grateful and upbeat. One day, the beautiful women said to one another on their way to the elevator, he will have a fleet of taxis. Such a charming man. I try out written drafts of all 3 versions. I show James my Ludhiana man stories, but he is unimpressed. Just another immigrant story, says James politely, full of cliches, really. My own story loops an easy arc from A to Z without much drama in between. The in-between is baskets of unwashed laundry, summers in Hawaii, chicken biryani recipes, a near-cancer scare, and a beat-up old Toyota. The stuff of life, really. Nothing that resets a broken clock. I married James and never regretted it. We are older now, and other than an unexpected affair in midlife, James has remained a good partner. Our marriage is an agreeable constant. We smile at each other over breakfast cups of coffee. We celebrate birthdays and anniversaries with cake and fervent declarations. We live without distress. Our ranch-style house in Eau Claire has a flowing yard with red geraniums in a pot outside the front door, a blue and white striped awning over the deck, a barbecue with room for 5 steaks and a single row of potatoes. We hang an Etsy sign on our front door that says, "In this house we believe Black lives matter, women's rights are human rights, No human is illegal. Love is love. Science is real. Kindness is everything. We see these signs spring up everywhere on immaculate front lawns. We tell ourselves we are good people. When Minneapolis was burning, yes, one among many cities, I thought of 7-Elevens. Not the falling towers, but the frightened men huddled in their dusty shops, waiting for ICE or the police to beat them out of hiding. People with mounds of basmati rice to sell and mango pickles on a shelf. Mosques emptied and hearts in quarantine. My other story, Man from Ludhiana, has become a ghostly presence on the borders of the city. He will not go away. We are all now writing stories, sometimes in memory, sometimes in air. The wind lifts and passes us in gusts. Our stories scatter over continents, camouflaged histories we cannot share. We await an apocalypse, or at least a bloodless street and a safe vaccine. Our words tell us we will survive. Our fingers knit and pearl, pearl and knit. The towers fell, and they are falling still. Thank you for listening.